Thank you for tuning in to the Parents Survival Kit, From Surviving to Thriving in Your Household. My name is Gene Schwalen, and with me I have my beautiful bride, Dr. Sonia Schwalen, expert pediatric psychologist, family psychologist, national certified school psychologist. Today, we're going to talk about co-parenting and what that means and some tips and tricks to make that work in your household. So, Dr. Schwalen, what is the definition of co-parenting?
That is a great question and something I really love that we're starting out with, because the point of our parenting series is really to go from surviving to thriving. And when people understand a real good definition for co-parenting, I think that's a very awesome place to start. So I believe that the definition of co-parenting is to present as a united front at all times.
Okay, and how do we do that?
Yeah, so let's break that down. What do you think of when I say that? Present as a united front at all times.
Well, I think of the old Roman armies where they had their shields and they would go into battle, and then when they were getting ready to attack, they'd go shield to shield and stand as one, and they couldn't, the barrier could not be, torn down or broken. The line could not be penetrated. That's what I think about as united front.
Okay, so that's a really awesome visual and not at all what I was expecting you to say, but I like it. Because I'm thinking that now. And so presenting as united front is like an unpenetrable force. It's a unified front. I mean, when I talk to families and parents and I ask them the question that you just asked me, what is co-parenting? I get all different variations on it. A lot of families will talk about, if they are a married, couple living under the same roof, and it's their, it's just them, right, doing the parenting. They'll talk about co-parenting in terms of some of the things we talked about last week, about different parenting styles, or, who's the good cop, who's the bad cop, that kind of response. And then if I ask maybe a single parent, what does co-parenting look like in your household? They might say something like, well, my teenager kind of helps out sometimes, or my mother-in-law, or the kid's grandma or grandpa or whoever is part of it, or we have someone that comes and helps out.
Okay.
And then for blended families, they can respond to that question very differently also. So co-parenting might be, we write everything down on a text message or in an email or different apps that help us communicate, and we call that co-parenting.
Well, and with blended families, because we are a blended family.
That's right.
There's different levels of blended families as well. There's the just divorced parents with kids that they share custody with, whatever that looks like. And then there's also blended families like us, to where we are married, but we have kids that also have another household with the mom and dad there as well when they're over there. So different levels, lots of different barriers to work through as well. So very difficult. I think that even in a regular mom and dad traditional type of household, co-parenting is still very difficult. And I think there's some reasons behind that. So can you kind of, just based on your experience with families, what are some of those difficulties just in the co-parenting in the actual same household?
Well, I'm going to go back to the definition of co-parenting. Let's just drive that home one more time. So the definition of co-parenting that we're going to use today is just the basic foundational presenting as a united front at all times, okay? And whether you're in a married couple type of parenting situation or not, it really comes down to the basics. That's what keeps it very hard. If they're not, if the parents aren't adhering to that definition of co-parenting. So when parents live together, right, and they're also a married couple, they can fall into patterns and routines and make assumptions and sometimes take for granted the fact that kids are listening at all times and watching at all times. And so I think that can make it really hard, just living day-to-day life, trying to get tasks accomplished and rushing through schedules and not being intentional in the co-parenting relationship.
Sure. Well, and if you think about it too, I mean, we have moms and dads today that typically in a lot of households, they both work. There's very demanding schedules with the work schedule. We've got kids. We want our kids to be the best at everything possible. So we've got Johnny in baseball, basketball, soccer, Susie's in gymnastics and dance and piano. And we're running around like crazy trying to make sure that we're putting our kids in all the right sports and all the right extracurricular activities, managing homework and all that. And it's a very demanding schedule. And then we all know that we all have our own parenting styles that we talked about last week. So we're different in our parenting styles. Everyone is different. And I think kids are very, very smart to pick that up at a very young age. They know who's going to be the easy parent, who's going to be the hard parent, who can I get away with this with, who can I not get away with this with, who do I go to if I want this or that. So how do we manage that as mom and dad, you and I, how do we manage that together to present as that united front at all times?
That's an awesome question. So you're talking about kids being able to really feel like who's the weakest link when it comes to certain aspects of parenting. And I think that any relationship, any parenting relationship can become stronger if it focuses on capitalizing on strengths of each parent. So being able to recognize the strengths of the other parent, and even your own strengths in yourself, and be okay with saying, you know what, you're much better at, maybe putting the kids on a routine and sticking to a schedule and implementing that routine. And I'm much better at, planning vacations and doing bigger decision types of things. So let's focus in on our strengths and tag team. Let's work together in that way. I think that can be very effective when parents are thinking about just what are they really good at, making sure they complement each other in the co-parenting relationship also.
Absolutely. Well, and we talked last week also about discipline. So there's going to be a mom or a dad who's going to be stronger in that area. And then, typically it's the dad, but that's not always true either. In a lot of cases, the mom is actually more disciplinary. And then there's also the emotional support. Kid gets hurt, and he wants to run to mom or to dad for that just emotional support, that nurturing, the things that they need at that time in that moment. So what are some things as far as what is the first step to really deciding who handles what tasks? What do we do to make this work? We all have busy schedules, as we talked about earlier. So I come home from work, and self-care is a big part of this, I think, too, but we're going to talk about that next week. But understanding each other, where we're at in the day, communicating, I think that's a very big key. Being flexible, but also having a schedule and having certain things that each one's doing in the household to make the day-to-day go a little bit easier.
So everything that you're talking about really starts with, like I always say, being proactive. So it really, when I work with families and parents especially, I like to talk to them about imagining that you are the managers of your household and you're running a business and the children are the employees. And if you want to run a successful business and have everything flow the way that it needs to and have everything just kind of run smoothly, you have to sit down as a management team, right? So in this case, as the parenting team, and you have to check in regularly. Okay. So I know in big corporations, they tend to have meetings about meetings, and there's a lot of meetings. And in this situation, I'm actually going to talk to families about making sure we have family meetings and parent meetings, because communication is so important, but also planning is very important. And so sitting down on a regular basis where, I'm going to say daily basis, really. So what I usually recommend is, when families are first starting to implement something like this and starting to think about, what do we want to do differently as parents? How can we make sure that we present as a united front at all times, right? That's kind of like a weekend project. They may have to carve out a few hours on the weekend or maybe get away one day during the week and really hash everything out. You know, what do we even want for our family? What do we value as a family? What do we want to make sure as the parents, you know, we're conveying to our children in terms of how we build their character and how we prepare them for the world once they become adults? You know, that's a really important co-parenting conversation. And I can't tell you how many times I sit down with families and they haven't really ever had a conversation like that with their co-parent. So that big picture framework is so important as the start. You know, just sit down and talk to your co-parent or co-parents about what is our ultimate objective, you know, for our kids, and how do we make sure we get there?
Yeah, and I think it's also going to be based on prioritizing what is most important, as you mentioned, looking at schedules, looking at tasks. I mean, when we have kids, you know, we have a 17-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So the 17-year-old requires a lot less of us being hands-on on a day-to-day, night-to-night basis, where our 2-year-old and 1-year-old, even our 7-year-old, they need bath time. They need storybooks at bedtime. They need to be tucked in and loved on and everything else. So just understanding some of those actual tasks or responsibilities we have as parents that we also love, but understanding what that looks like. So one thing that we talk about as a business is looking at scheduling, looking at time blocking, understanding who's responsible for what task, what time block, what's that look like. So that way we can work together in those areas, and that's really, really big.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do right now, honestly, is I'm trying to pull you back. I'm trying to pull you out of the task list, right? And it's real easy to go there. It's real easy to kind of get stuck in that. Like, well, there's different things that we have to do every day and get accomplished. This is a real common thing that parents will do when they think about co-parenting. How do I divide the tasks? Okay, you're going to be responsible for this, and I'm going to be responsible for that. And then eventually at the end of the day will come, and we'll both be so exhausted, we'll take one look at each other and we'll probably go our separate ways, because you want to watch your show and I want to watch mine, and I don't want to talk to anybody anymore. And so part of being able to present as United Front at all times is to make sure that we're spending time first as parents in relationship. Okay, so building the bond, building the connection and the trust, and having that explicit conversation as many times as it needs to happen is, what's the big picture? What's our overarching goal? Because if we lose sight of that, getting down to the nitty-gritty, the tasks, will become painful. It will become just like begrudgingly something we have to move through each day, and we may stop appreciating the other person for everything that they're contributing and just kind of take each other for granted in those situations. So everything you're saying absolutely has a purpose and a time to start talking about that. I think that's like a few episodes down the road.
Okay.
I love that that's what happened, though, right now, because that's what families do. That's what parents do. They want to just like talk about, look at all the things we have to get done per day. How can we possibly stop and take a step back and reset? And that's what I'm saying is so important to do when you're trying to co-parent effectively.
So it sounds like we just need to take a step back first and really model more of what relation looks like to our kids, showing them that we are together, not just in how we parent, but in every aspect of our marriage being one. That comes first, and then everything trickling down. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, that's excellent. You know, being able to live out your co-parenting relationship, whether you're married to the co-parent or not, in a way that shows at all times you are together when it comes to the child. Okay. So the first step really is to sit down as co-parents and say, you know, some of the things I mentioned earlier. Who or what kind of person are we trying to raise? You know, what is the end product going to look like? What are our values as a family? What's important for character traits that we're trying to focus on, and get on the same page from that broader perspective. After you nail some of that down, it's recommended to actually then plan out a daily meeting, especially for co-parents that live in the same house.
That's where that scheduling comes in. Okay.
Exactly. We definitely pay attention to the schedule eventually. We're not going to ditch that. But I recommend that, kind of what I alluded to is you get through each task of the day, and then at the end of the day, both people are exhausted. They look at each other and they go their separate ways. I'm actually going to say make time to come together at the end of that day, even if it's just for 20 minutes. And just like business owners, sitting down and saying, what went well today, or I appreciate this about you because you handled X, Y, and Z. And then here are some things that I think we need to work on. And so this is just a very, objective time. It's not to rile one another up or hurt each other's feelings. It's not for judgment. It's more of, this felt kind of stressful for me when this happened. How can we troubleshoot that and work through it for tomorrow, really? So those 20-minute check-ins are so important on a daily basis. They're also really important because one of the things I talk to families about all the time, moms and dads, is how are you going to present as united front at all times when you absolutely don't agree with what just happened? What do you do in those moments? Because what I'm saying is present as a united front at all times. There are no exceptions. Well, there's one exception, and it's if you feel like the child is in danger and you need to step in, that's definitely the exception.
So
okay, but apart from that, there are no exceptions to this. It's a very concrete, black and white rule that we're trying to apply.
So when we disagree, we agree to disagree behind a closed door.
That's right. You've been listening. So when parents disagree, you agree to disagree behind a closed door. And so if mom, you don't like the way dad handled a certain situation, you back dad up in that situation. So that's what the child sees.
And then moms, when you discipline your little girl and she comes running crying to daddy and she just melts daddy every time and has daddy around her little pinky finger, dads, you also have to back mom up in those times as well.
Right.
Which can be very difficult for a dad.
Yeah, it can be very difficult for a mom too. And so, some strategies that I like to recommend are things like, especially if kids are going to one parent and saying, can I do this? And, you always want to say, well, I need to check with your mom first. Or I think I just heard you ask mom in the other room. What did she say? Right? So you always want to include the other parent in the decision-making process and allow the child to hear and see that. If it's for bigger things, like I want to buy these new pair of shoes or this new video game, can I do that, Dad? How do you think Dad should respond?
Well, let's talk to your mom and see what she thinks about that.
Right. And so one of the things that I want to caution against, though, is let's talk to your mom. It's actually, I need to talk to your mom, and we'll decide together what our decision is. So there's a lot of things with kids, even teenagers, that I say they are absolutely not to be a part of when it comes to parenting decisions and parenting discussions. There's a lot of times where families will come into clinic and I'm working with them, and understanding the dynamics in the parenting relationship and in the family dynamic. And there's so many topics that parents will discuss right in front of their child. So I'll give you a really great example. Currently, the topic of conversation for a lot of teenagers is, should they be able to go out and hang out with their friends? They're going stir crazy at home. Teenagers are very social beings. It's very developmentally appropriate for them to want to be around other kids their age and have fun. And social distancing is just really difficult for them to do right now during COVID. And so I've had many times where parents have brought this discussion up in front of the child while they're in the room and they're debating their perspectives. Maybe mom thinks like it's totally a no-go. They should not be around friends at this time. It's not safe. It's very scary. And dad says, I think we should relax a little. Maybe if they come to our house and wear a mask. So Now the child has access to a disagreement between the mom and the dad.
Or even just reasoning, which allows them some leverage as well in some areas.
The leverage is such a good word. But they also have access to taking it a step further, which can be very hurtful in the parent-child relationship, and I've seen it, where if, maybe now we're saying, no, you're not allowed to go out with your friends, that child is going to almost go to the place of this is all mom's fault. Dad was okay with me. I heard that dad was okay with it. Mom's the one who's being unreasonable. And so it can cause some strain in the parent-child relationship when the child has access to that disagreement because those parents had that conversation in front of the child.
It makes perfect sense. It just goes along with, it makes me think about other things too, like, screen time and social media and all the things, video games kids want to do. Having those discussions, coming up with expectations, setting rules and guidelines and all that through those family meetings or through those individual meetings between the parents, and then having those family meetings with the kids, understanding exactly what the expectations are, how things are going to be lined out and whatnot, to make things a little bit easier. There's so much to think about when it comes to parenting these days.
Yep, there is. There's a lot to think about. And if we just always go back to the basic of how do we present as United Front at all times, it can serve as a reminder that, okay, I have a different thought about how that should have been handled. I'll make sure in my 20-minute, window of time this evening, I bring it up and I speak about it because I want to come up with an alternative way of handling that feels good and comfortable for me too. That's always what's got to be on the parent's mind, is knowing tonight we get to talk about it. Tonight we get to work through it, because that can also be really a difficult thing for a lot of parents. They may be in the habit of disagreeing openly. They may be in the habit of calling another parent out in front of the children or undermining or whatever you want to call that. And it's very hard to pull back on that. So this is something that parents have to be very intentional about. They have to work on it, and they have to give themselves and each other grace, okay? Because no one's going to be perfect overnight. So I really do take a lot of time with parents to process that too. So what is it going to be like to actually bite your tongue in the moment and not say what you're thinking, because we're going to be trying it a new way.
Yeah, and we're going to make mistakes. We talked about that last week. We will make mistakes in parenting. We do it all the time, and that's also how we learn to work together, learn how to succeed for our children. And that's where also just humbling ourselves come in, and learning how to apologize in front of the kids, and letting the kids know that it's okay to make mistakes and to be sorry. That's a great learning experience for the kids as well. And it comes back to the whole company focus that you talked about, being a company or running the household like a company. With the company that the Next Steps Clinic, we have a leadership team that makes decisions. So when people understand decisions have been made, it's not so-and-so making the decision, it's the leadership team. So
right.
Having those parents, it's not like mom or dad or mom. It's a team. It's one team.
Yep.
It's aligned.
Exactly. And when parents operate as a team and they say, hey, we decided that it's going to happen like this, or I can't give you an answer until I speak to mom, it helps the parents deliver parenting much more confidently. Knowing that they're not in this alone, knowing that their co-parent is in it with them through and through all the way. And so that works very effectively for the parents that live together under the same roof and for the parents of a blended family. If the parents of a blended family can come together and are able to communicate in, hey, we're on the same page, we want what's best for this child, and this is what it looks like. We want to raise someone who, whatever it may be, attends and graduates college, for example. I'm thinking long-term goals. We want to raise someone who is a functioning citizen in this society. We want to raise someone who understands how to deal with their emotions in an appropriate way and ask for help. We want to raise someone who's kind and generous and, maybe God-loving, or whatever it is, whatever's important to those parents. If they're able to get on the same page and on those big picture things, it becomes much easier to then remember we have to present as a united front. Even if you may not like that person anymore or there's conflict between you because of the past, when it comes to the child and parenting that child with parenting decisions, it's all about presenting as a united front.
Yeah, and it comes down to also sometimes where we have to give in. Like if I feel strongly about, I'm okay with this, but you're not okay with this, sometimes I have to give in some areas, and it's that give and take as well, to be on the same page.
And that's so important, you know, the art of compromise. And I think next week when we talk about self-care, we'll talk about kind of how all this goes together. This is much easier to compromise when you're also taking care of yourself, and not everything feels like, you know, such a big deal because you're so stressed out. So all of those pieces are so important to be able to effectively co-parent.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like as a coach, when you have a team, everyone's willing to give in and do their part and even sacrifice for the team when you're working truly as a team. But you mentioned all of these what I want to say core values. You know, how do we want to raise our kids? What do we want for them as they grow older, as they get into society, as they become a man and a woman on their own? You talked, some great things you mentioned. It reminded me of the core values we set for our kids and what we have posted on the refrigerator. So that could be a really good tip to sit down as a family and talk about what are the most important things that we believe in: integrity, love, friendship, forgiveness, grace, instilling those types of just qualities in our kids from a very early age. And even if their kids are a little bit older now, it's okay. It's never too late to start. It's very, very important to talk about those and let them know that those are things you really want for them.
Yeah, I mean, I share that with the families I work with all the time. I have a picture of it, of the Schwalen family core values, and I show that to families all the time. I say, you know what, this is an example of what this can look like. And it's literally just sitting down with your children. It doesn't matter how young or old they are, because everybody in the family can have some input, and say, you know, let's come up with a few things that we value. And for younger kids, you might say, what are some things that are important to you? Or what do you want to make sure our family does or remembers every day? And then you start getting some responses, and it's really cool to see what your children are thinking about. They might say, you know, I want to make sure we have fun every day, or I want to make sure we give hugs every day, or I want to make sure we spend time together every day. And so you're starting to get an idea of what's important to your child. You write down everything that's said, and even the parents can contribute to this list, because I remember when we did it, our list was probably like 25 things long. And then after taking a step back and looking, I found like this common theme with all of them.
Sure.
And we took those 25 and we were actually able to pare it down to just five core values. I think we came up
sub values underneath each one.
We came up with, we're going to, because our faith is important to us, we said we're going to be like Jesus and we're going to be forgiving. And then we also said we're going to have integrity, which means we're going to do what's right even when no one's looking.
We're going to be servant leaders.
We're going to be servant leaders. We're going to help others. We're going to treat others the way we want to be treated, and we're going to be playful, and we're going to have fun. So I do remember those are the Schwalen family core values. And the cool thing is that comes out of that conversation that first the parents have, and then the parents lead that in the children. And now it's, hanging on the fridge in our house. And every time we need a reminder, it's there. We can, refer back to it. And it helps us present as United Front, because now we have a tool that we both reference when we're parenting in the moment. And it's something that we've all agreed on, that this is how we're going to, handle ourselves in all situations.
Yeah, it's like the rules of the house in a positive way. And when the kids make a mistake, we can talk about them. Okay, it's okay to say sorry. We forgive. We ask for forgiveness, and we also forgive. And so it's an easy way to also discipline your children in a positive way as well.
That's right.
Based on some core values that everyone has actually agreed upon and contributed to. So.
Yep.
So I have one really big question that we could probably close on unless you have anything else. But there are times in blended situations, mom and dad do not get along. That's very, very common. Mom does one thing, dad does another thing. One's right, one's wrong, one's wrong, one's right. Kids see this, they play on this. They're back and forth who they want to be with at times. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that. But if I'm dad and I feel like, you know, these are my rules and I want to, you know, I have these core values and maybe mom doesn't do that. I'm just using this as an example. But dad has these core values. Mom doesn't have these core values. Dad has stricter guidelines and whatnot. Mom does not necessarily. And it could be flipped the other way around, and depending on the family. What do we do if I'm the person that has these core values and guidelines? How do I kind of continue to implement that in a positive way, even when it may not be happening on the other end? And how do I keep my child, when my child's with me, you know, in that same line, when they may be completely different on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, that is such a common question and such a common occurrence because, like you said, sometimes, or actually more times than I would like to say, I actually see where divorced families don't get along. And children are faced with essentially living a completely different life depending on whose roof they're under. And so the inconsistencies between the households and the values and just the way parenting is even done is huge. And you're right. Sometimes kids, you know, get tired of one household and prefer to be at the other for different reasons. It may be because they feel like one household is too strict, or for the exact opposite reason, where I've seen many times kids, as they get older, they actually prefer the household where things are more structured and more routine, and they know what to depend on because it helps them cope better. You know, so kids also respond differently just depending on maybe what life stage they're in.
Well, I think one thing that we know for sure is that when kids have more structure, they thrive more. And this is the whole point of the parent's survival kit is going from surviving to thriving. When kids have structure, they know what to expect, what to depend on, they thrive more. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And, you know, children are resilient, and so they can overcome situations where the structure and the predictability and the clear expectations don't exist. But we do know at the same time, when those things are in place, a child tends to thrive and do much, much better in that situation. And so what I tell parents that are in this situation, first of all, you know, if I'm doing family therapy or even like therapeutic or parent training with some of these families, I'm never going to have that child in the same room as both parents. You know, I might switch week on is a session with dad, you know, the next week is a session with mom, because that's how that child experiences their parents. They don't experience their parents under the same roof. And so I would never create that in a therapy session for them. And then what I would try to do as the therapist is work with both sides to implement the same types of strategies in both homes. So without them even knowing it, they're creating consistency between both households for that one child. You know, so that's the ideal situation when those families are in therapy. When they're not in therapy and people are left to kind of navigate this co-parenting conundrum on their own, my recommendation is for, you know, that parent who is trying to adhere to core values and routine and structure and predictability to just stay the course, to continue to do what you know is best for your child, because at least they're getting it from somewhere. At least they have that one parent that they can rely on, the household that they can feel secure in. And even if at times it feels like your child may be resisting that, just know, and I've seen it many, many times, those kids eventually do come around and they come to appreciate what you're trying to do for them.
Absolutely. It's really goes back to integrity and showing them, you know, belief systems. And it's hard because I know you want to win the approval of your kids in that situation, but staying the course is definitely the most important. And I think the whole idea behind all of this is, you know, the co-parenting, you know, definition, standing as a united front at all times, no matter what. And I think that comes down to servant leadership we talked about in core values, is being a servant leader to our kids, to the other co-parents, no matter what relationship looks like, and just really doing what's best for our kids. That's our responsibility to our kids. Yep. So do you have anything to close with, Dr. Swalen? Any tips or tricks we can end with?
Just remember, present as a united front at all times.
So we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.